This is Monocle on Design, a show where we discuss everything from architecture and craft to furniture and fashion. I'm Nick Manise. Today's program is an architecture special. We'll hear from British designer John Pawson and the founder of Australian practice, Prineas Studio, plus another instalment of our summer series. All that coming up on Monocle on Design. John Pawson is one of Britain's most celebrated architects. His minimalist aesthetic, influenced by Japanese philosophy, has redefined contemporary interiors and architecture. His portfolio includes everything from private residences and public spaces to furniture. And across the course of his career, this portfolio has been supported by long-standing partners such as Danish timber specialist Dinesen. Indeed, after using Dinesen's 15-metre-long Douglas fir floorboards in his home in London, Pawson went on to create a line of furniture for the company. First launched in the 1990s, it has recently been updated to include dining tables, benches, sofas and daybeds, all made from impressive lengths of Douglas fir and oak. John joined me in the studio to reflect on this partnership and talk about his body of work more broadly.
By and large, it's not that controversial. I mean, you're not a politician. And people aren't waiting for you to trip up or having a go or disagreeing violently with you.
Mm. But do you feel people disagree with you from time to time?
I don't think so. I mean, I was very surprised when we did the Design Museum in Kensington, and in the first 15 months they had 1 million visitors, and they recorded their opinions. So you had 1 million different opinions. It's too tall, it's too short, it's too wide, it's too woody, it's too whitey, it was incredible. And then people wrote, quite rude things too.
What do you do with that information? Was there good information in it?
Oh, no, never read never read below the line, or whatever the expression is. Very, very good advice. No, I mean, it's complete claptrap.
Mm.
And if you have a review of a job that you've done, especially the stuff in the public realm, you'll always get a couple of journalists who have a go at you for no particular reason. You meet them 5 years later and they said, we were just feeling funny that day, or it upsets you, but not them.
But what's a productive conversation to have around a finished building?
Most of my time is spent, with my head down, working with the other people in the office, working with the team to design a future building. So you're putting it together, and I mean, stating the obvious, but you can't erase walls or move walls, or you can't fiddle with a finished building. I mean, unless you're prepared to spend thousands. So you've got to get it right on paper and then build it, and then it's too late, really. To do anything, you move on to the next one. But you're very, very, very careful before you start building. Or, well, we are anyway.
Is this something that you've learnt, I guess, over your practice? Like, how quickly did you realise that it's just best to move on and focus on the next thing?
It takes a long time to get a building in the round to actually build. We were very lucky early on, when I was still in partnership with Claudio, to do a house in Mallorca in the late 80s. And I didn't get another house to do for 15 years. So you have time to work things out before you start. There are exceptions, very precocious ones. But normally you don't start building till you're 40. So you've got 10 odd years under your belt before you're allowed bricks and mortar. Theoretically, anyway.
In that period from 20 to 40, what should aspiring designers and architects be looking to learn or looking to cultivate in themselves?
Gosh, it is a question I'm asked, and I really don't have an answer. And it's interesting that I've never taught. I mean, most architects definitely at least spend some time teaching regularly. I mean, I've lectured, but that's very different. You don't take questions. The only advice I really normally give is that architecture is such a broad subject that you can do any part of it. And it's not just, designing and building a building. There's teaching, there's advising, there's all sorts of areas if it's something that you're enjoying or liking, then you stick with it. I mean, if you're building, you need clients. I mean, that is definitely true. But there are lots of areas you don't need clients. And it took me a long time to come to architecture. I was 30 before I started studying. I was pretty sure by then that I'd exhausted all other channels, like teaching, like photography, like the rag trade for my family business. And it was so nice to find a trade that I could do, that every single minute that I've spent in the last 40 years has been fun. I'm privileged that I don't have to do the bits in the middle too much, the boring bits. But it's amazing. So I think I would always recommend somebody to do what they really enjoy doing and not worry about outward success or I mean, you've got to live, of course.
What's the, I guess, legacy that you're hoping is left? We were talking about architects going out of fashion. What do you want people to think of when they think of John Pawson architecture?
Well, people do talk about legacy, I mean, especially as I'm 75, but it's never been high on the agenda for me. I'm very much in the moment. I like doing the building that I'm working on, or the furniture collection, or the objects, or a book. Doing that well, I mean, just trying to get the building right. There are other things. I mean, there's family and happiness and health and nice wine. You've
worked with Denison for 30 years. You've just released a new collection with them. How has your partnership evolved since 1992 when you first worked with them?
My career is based on partners, the guys, the girls in the office, and of course the clients. And in Denison's case, the suppliers. And in a sense, they're almost like clients. You're reliant on such a huge team. The credit lists on the jobs go on forever, which is great if you've got the room to put them down. And of course, that myth that one man does it all, as if I could do any of it myself. I mean, I can't even draw. I mean, I'm not a draftsman. I mean, I can take a photograph and I can describe what I want. And I persevere, but I don't have a facility.
So what role did Denison play in, I guess, pulling together this collection? I mean, I know that it's based on 3 decades, and you'd originally designed a dining series for them in 1992.
At the beginning of the 90s, Catherine and I, my wife, we started work on our first house together in Nottingdale, which is at the bottom of the hill. I was keen to use Japanese oak, straight grain bleached Japanese oak, which I'd, got used to in Japan and used on some apartments in London. And Richard Rogers had seen this oak and asked if I could tell him where to get it and have a look at it. And I said, well, actually, I've got some on site, the house I'm doing. Do you want to pop by? So Richard Rogers, who I didn't know, obviously I knew exactly who he was, and John Young, one of the partners who did all the high-tech stuff, they popped round to the house. So it was slightly overwhelming. And under Richard's arm was this huge plank of Denison Douglas fir. And of course it immediately caught my eye because it was 1/2 metre wide and thick and absolutely gorgeous. And he said, oh, that's nothing. It's far too busy, Richard said, about the wood. So I said, and he said, oh, you can have it. So I took that, and he took the Japanese oak. So we did this swap. I ordered these boards from Denison. It was very fortuitous, and that was an incredible thing. And in those days, Denison were just doing churches and public manor houses in Denmark and Scandinavia. I didn't really clock that. I just thought, I want this board, and how long can I have it, and how big? We've done quite a few projects with it, and I was very lucky to find that. And I persuaded them to do the same thing with oak. They said, well, we don't do oak. And I said, well, think about it, politely. And then they very kindly did some elm for me. And I've sort of gently steered them, because it was a really super family business of 5 generations. And they're charming. And it's very nice going to the Black Forest in Germany and choosing a tree and cutting it down and knowing It's a renewable forest. And Douglas fir grows it never stops growing. I mean, I just was interested in attenuation. If you can push something, I mean, the boards come up to 15 metres long and half a metre wide. I mean, that's a big board. When they were delivered, the trailer couldn't get near enough. So they had to take them off the lorry and carry them around the streets, 15-metre boards. It was a good sight.
I mean, how often does attenuation drive your decision-making? I mean, that's quite fascinating as well, that the instinct isn't to cut it down to size, but instead, I guess, push a boundary.
I mean, I've sometimes worried lately if I was, exaggerating for the sake of it, but I've always been interested in that. It's like if you stand next to a marble top that's, 4 inches thick or 100 millimetres thick and 4 or 5 or 6 metres long, you feel different. It's not some little bar. It's a massive piece of stone. And it changes how you feel. When I was a child, a teenager, my parents said that we could get a dog. And so, of course, I researched it. And an Irish wolfhound, of course, was being the tallest dog you could get. So we had an Irish wolfhound. I had a racing bike, which took me ages to specify each component. There must be 50 different components you can specify to put it together. But pushing the boundaries and also, I think, doing things that other people wouldn't go to the trouble of doing. I mean, doing a shadow gap, which is something we brought in England. I mean, I got it from Kuramata in Japan in the 70s. That was something new, all these sort of things. No skirtings, no cornices. Pushing all of that is difficult and expensive and hard work, but means that other people aren't doing it.
You mentioned feeling there. I think that's quite a beautiful way to approach a project. How often does that drive something and versus the constraints of a site or the constraints of a material? Is it a chicken or the egg sort of scenario?
Well, constraints are good. If you have a clear site, there are things which contribute to how you're going to build it. There are restrictions, all sorts of restrictions. So that's, in a sense, a help, I think.
And then what about that feeling element? How does that inform the decisions that you make?
You have an instinct, you have a feeling, you have emotions, and a different person standing in exactly the same spot, in the same weather, the same smells, would do something different than I would. I mean, it's very, very personal. And it's interesting when you take a photograph, you're standing in the same position with the same type of camera and the same angle, and you have a different photograph. I'm not saying it's better, but it's different. Mm. But material is a very important component. And so something like Denison wood, I mean, to be able to get boards that big and that luscious and sensual, and the pink colour that comes through is very soft and beautiful, and it's a contrast in a way to the massive boards. If you don't put a carpet down or a rug and cover it, or if you don't fill the middle of the room with furniture, you get to see these massive boards. It's pretty, especially when they run through the 2 other rooms.
I mean, what was the atmosphere in your home that you were looking to curate? Did you put rugs down? Did you put furniture down?
No, we didn't. And also, people don't understand why you don't have pictures on the wall. I like a wall. An empty wall is beautiful. I'm not here to sell empty walls particularly, but when the boards came, you saw how easy it could be to transform those boards into furniture. You just had to put 2 pieces of the floorboards together and you had a table. You cut them down and you had a stool or a bench or even a bed. You just did everything. And I used the width of the board. I didn't want to cut them any further down. It's all modular, built around. We did beds, tables, benches and low tables and things like that. And then when the children were young, we could turn the benches on their side and they formed very low chairs for them when they were watching TV. So it was quite sweet.
And if this original collection was designed for you and your family, who's this next collection for? Is it still for John Pawson?
I don't know whether it sounds selfish or self-centered, but I think we've done like 200 projects, buildings and things in the last 40 years. And every single one has been for me. Of course, you can't do a project without a client. I mean, you have to have their ideas, their focus, and they bring more to the table than you do because they're full of drive and ideas, and it makes the work varied. Otherwise, it would all be white marble or Denison boards.
Do you think working for yourself in that way delivers a better outcome? Is there, or have you found that works for you?
I mean, I've done a few competitions, but generally speaking, people come to us with a project. I don't, have to go after work in that sense. People are already sort of committed. I have to feel every project is, although we've done, I mean, touch wood is something I'm being invested in. There's nothing that I leave totally to somebody else.
You mentioned there that, that those first benches and stools could be turned on their side and make a seat for kids. How did you have such a minimal house with children? Surely there were like Lego blocks and how do you strike that balance in atmosphere, the busyness of life and yet the peace and serenity of these spaces you make?
I think it's a misconception because our house was always the most popular house on the block because the other kids could come and go wild in the space because there was nothing to break. If you're setting out Warhammer or whatever the toys were at the time or using Lego, you've got free reign. You can go for it. People misunderstand that.
And how do you go for it now?
Not Lego. I've never got my head around Lego. We've got a place in the country and there was always going to be this idea of having a country studio and I was going to do great work there. And every time I go there, it's so peaceful and so relaxing that I can't contemplate work at all. I just completely go blank. So it's rather nice. So that's what I do. Catherine comes by me and she says, "Oh, as you're not doing anything, can you just empty the dustbin?" So I'm like, "No, I'm designing," which is true actually. Ideas come when you're least expecting them. I mean, I don't go mad and write them down, but
well, that'd be too much.
I know, honestly.
My thanks to the architect John Pawson there.
What kind of city do you want to live in? Every week on The Urbanist, we delve into the biggest questions about urban living and meet the people championing change in our cities. From star-architects to designosauruses, protected views to landfills, river walks and sidewalks, wayfinding and cycle highways. The city is alive and kicking, so how can we make them better places to live in?
The other great city creation, of course, is sex. Young people go to cities to have a good time and to enjoy themselves and to meet their life partners and maybe a few other people on the way.
Join me, Andrew Tuck, every Thursday at 2000 hours London time for a brand new episode. Or subscribe to the podcast and listen as you go. The Urbanist, the show that knows its good mares from its planning nightmares.
It's summertime. It's the summer series. Monocle Design's Summer Essentials.
It's time for another edition of the Summer Series. I'm joined in the studio by Monocle's fashion director, Natalie Theodosi. Natalie, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Now, we are here to discuss your essential piece of seasonal design. What are you pitching? What can't you do without this summer?
So it's a dream object. It's sadly not something that I own, but it would be the Loca Solas Sun Lounger, and it's a special re-edition by Simone Porte-Jacquemus, the fashion designer. So it really kind of marries my love of fashion and design all in one.
What does this lounger look like? Is it a very sleek, simple thing, or is it complex and playful?
So it dates back to 1964. It was designed by the Italian architect Gaio Lenti with Exteta, so it has this very vintagey 1960s charm, which is what drew me to it to begin with. And just imagine a really sleek sun lounger. It has two really large rolling wheels, which make it stand out a lot more. And then this re-edition in particular has been just reworked with modern fabrics that Simone Porte-Jacquemus has chosen. And I really love the yellow and white striped one, and also all the details. If you look closely, there's a little hand stitching on the edges. It's really functional as well. You can roll it around. So I think it's a really beautiful, sunny item.
Like, it's one of those things you look at and it feels playful. Like you said, there's the yellow and white stripes, which feel appropriately summery.
Exactly. We love a stripe here at Monocle.
You mentioned it's got the wheels. These aren't like simple little caster wheels. These are like quite big, robust. Natalie, I could picture you, maybe a nice pool boy, kind of picking up and moving you around, making sure you're in the shade or the sun, depending on what you need.
100%, but it is so functional that I could pick it up myself as well when the pool boy needs to have a break.
You could. How very considerate.
And I love this idea of design and function coming together.
Practicality and and a beautiful marriage of fashion and design.
Absolutely, yeah. Simone Porte-Jacquemus was actually a collector of Gaio Lenti chairs and a big fan, so it's nice to see these worlds come together. We always speak about the marriage of design and fashion, how interiors designers, architects, and fashion designers are always flirting with each other. They're always looking to find new collaborations, and I think this is a great example.
It's perfect, and I think perfect for us to hopefully, by the end of summer, find ourselves on one of these with a couple of pool boys pulling us around.
Cheers to that, I guess.
It's the summer series. Monocle Designs Summer Essentials. Design Essentials.
Finally, on today's show, I'm joined in the studio by Eva-Marie Prineas, founder of Sydney-based Studio Prineas. Since 2004, the architecture practice has focused on building on the city's historic and layered architectural legacy.
Layers are a very important part of how we think conceptually about things. In the last few years, we're really thinking about the ancient layers of country and how we can really work with country and design with country and respect country. So often the first layer is really that ancient heritage, and on our projects we try and bring that back in the ecology and sort of re-establishing the original ecology. But then we also have the sort of colonial history, and there's a lot of that in Sydney where we primarily work. There's like all the new layers. So when we've got clients that come along with a house that's potentially a post-colonial house, then we add another layer as well, and it's thinking about how we're going to do that and also how we are going to leave enough space for someone else to do something in another 50 years or 100 years.
So also the opportunity to add an additional layer, that's also built into your thinking?
Yeah, I think so, and more now, because every intervention we make has an impact on the environment, and trying to do things in a really sensitive way so people don't have to redo it later on, just creating unnecessary work.
It's thinking of that future layer actually also makes you think about how you behave in the present and how you work in the present in a way that's going to ensure that layer doesn't have to strip things back to then continue. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. We have to think like that. I have this kind of idea about thinking more and building less. And I think we need to do that because it's really the most sustainable way to move forward, or the most responsible way to move forward in a sustainability sense.
That's also quite funny to hear an architect say that, building less. Doesn't that surely hurt your practice if you're stopping from building, if you're building less? Does that make sense? Like, doesn't that go counter to what an architect should be doing?
I don't think so. When you're working with existing buildings, you have to think about what you need to keep and what you might not necessarily have to keep. And they're the decisions that are really important moving forward, so that you're doing as little as possible, but with as much impact as necessary.
You also mentioned the word responsibility there. I think we have words in our design and architectural lexicon like sustainability that have almost become non-words. For me, it's finding other ways of talking about sustainability without using the word sustainability, where people tend to tune out. Tell us a little bit about your choice of the word responsibility. Why use that to, I guess, guide the work that you're doing on these projects?
The word sustainable, it's almost an oxymoron in construction. Everything that we do is creating more of a carbon footprint. So it's not necessarily trying to kind of say that we're environmentally sustainable, because we now know what the impact is. It's about being responsible about our choices moving forward and understanding that we are making an impact and we are going to be we're doing more work, we're creating more footprint, we're creating more carbon, but doing it in a responsible way so that we're minimising the impact as much as possible.
Can you point to any specific examples where responsibility has come into the work that you're doing?
Often we have clients that approach us and tell us that they want to do a knockdown and rebuild, and we will always encourage them to try and see the beauty in what's there and maybe add a little more rather than completely demolishing and starting all over again. For a long time, we've always said that we understand and adapt places that are already special. So we find the beauty in what's there and build on that rather than starting again with zero context really and pretending that there was never anything there. I think every layer that has been added over time has its own importance, and sometimes you might keep it, sometimes you might alter it a little bit, and sometimes you might need to remove it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everything has to go.
I guess in terms of choosing what you keep and remove, do you have a framework for making those decisions? Like, let's say you have got a beautiful colonial house that maybe had a really subjectively ugly extension in the 1970s. Is that something that you might respect, or is that something that you might be like, you know what, this has got to go, it's not true to the values that we're trying to build with? Do you have a framework for working through what you do and don't keep?
A lot of the time it comes down to the construction of what has been added and the construction of what's actually there. If it's got longevity, if it's built in a way that is really solid and has good foundations and can be built on, then there is absolutely no reason to remove it. Other times it might just be in really bad condition and it just has to be removed. But in that case, we might think about how we might reuse certain parts of it. During construction, I suppose, a lot of the time we'll discover things on site. So we might have designed something in a particular way, and then during demolition we find that actually it used to be like this, so maybe actually we should keep this and then forego like the original design plan, and we might have to shift a little bit. And I think they're really exciting things that happen during construction. There's so much character in what you have that's already there. A lot of the time it can add a sense of authenticity to a house and a design and a piece of architecture that maybe starting afresh might just not have the same sense of character.
You're talking about layers and history and coming back and you revisiting things. You talked there about country as well, which I think in Australia, for our listeners that aren't Australian, we're referring to the traditional owners of the land, their relationship with it, the Aboriginal people, the Indigenous people, and their connection with the landscape. Explain a little bit about how that can be brought back in. You mentioned through the flora and fauna, through the planting. Are you developing an understanding of country, or how do you bring these things in?
Look, it's really tricky at the moment because ideally on a lot of large projects, if you're working on a really large project, you'll bring in an Indigenous expert and talk to them and actually have them sort of lead the process. But on a house, for example, it's a lot more difficult. One way that we've been able to at least acknowledge that is through landscape, working with landscape designers who have an understanding of the pre-colonial landscape and the pre-colonial ecology. What we did on one project is we developed with our landscapers a reference ecology, which was kind of across the harbour, but it would have been very similar to what was on the original site. And we went for a bushwalk with our clients and we looked at all the planting, and then we ended up coming up with a really beautiful scheme with some lovely planting for the project. During the process, once the garden started to grow, we discovered that we were getting beautiful fauna coming to the site. So paper wasps, which are really, really good for the ecology. They're really important.
So these decisions kind of actually help further strengthen that original connection to country by bringing in this fauna in particular.
Yeah, and it's also like it's an acknowledgement, I think, which is really important, and it's difficult to know exactly what the right thing to do is, and we're all still learning. But certainly by acknowledging how old the country is and what it used to be like and trying to restore it, it's just that another layer of conservation, which I think is really important. And then there's also so many benefits to doing that, because these landscapes worked so well, require less maintenance because they require less water. Native planting makes a lot of sense to come back to. So I think a lot of the time designing with country is also sustainable.
The architect Eva-Marie Prineas there. And that's all for today's show. For more design stories, listen to our 5-minute midweek bonus show, Monocle on Design Extra, which airs on Thursdays. And if you enjoy print, then do pick up a copy of Monocle magazine as well. It's on all good newsstands now. Today's episode was produced and edited by Maylee Evans. I'm Nick Manise, and you can reach me on nm@monocle.com. Thanks for listening.